A billionaire was driving home with his fiancée until he saw his ex walking toward the highway with twins. Welcome to Secrets Narrated. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. When the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and share what you felt along the way. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with twists, hidden truths, and life-changing decisions, make sure to follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss the next one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy every detail. Daniel Brooks checked his rearview mirror as he guided his silver Mercedes G-Wagon through the congested streets of downtown Manhattan. The early evening sun filtered through the tinted windows, casting warm light across the cream leather interior and illuminating the woman beside him. Vanessa Clark, 32, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and designer sunglasses pushed up like a headband. She scrolled through wedding venue websites on her iPad, occasionally tilting the screen toward him. The Hamptons estate can accommodate 300 guests, Vanessa said, her voice bright with excitement. And they have that gorgeous ocean view for the ceremony. What do you think? Daniel nodded, his dark brown eyes focused on the brake lights ahead. At 39, he had built an empire that revolutionized financial technology. His wealth measured not in millions, but in billions. His dark hair, recently cut in the sharp, professional style Vanessa preferred, caught the light as he glanced at her. Whatever makes you happy. You know I trust your taste. Vanessa beamed. I love how easy you are about all this. My sister said her husband had opinions about everything when they were planning. Easy. That was exactly what Daniel had designed his life to be. After years of complicated relationships and emotional intensity, simplicity felt like the ultimate luxury. His relationship with Vanessa was 11 months old, long enough to propose, short enough that they'd never had a difficult conversation. She wanted the same things he did: elegant dinner parties, exotic vacations, a beautiful home without the chaos of family obligations. I've learned to appreciate what works, Daniel said. No more arguments about wanting different things. No more tearful conversations about timelines and biological clocks. No more guilt for prioritizing his company over building a family he'd never wanted. The traffic crawled to a near stop as they approached the highway on-ramp. Daniel's phone buzzed with notifications from his executive team, but he silenced them. Friday evenings were for Vanessa: wine tastings, Broadway shows, conversations that stayed comfortably on the surface. I'm thinking Amalfi Coast for the honeymoon, Vanessa continued. 2 weeks, just us, no work emergencies. Daniel smiled, but something in his chest tightened. Just us. Exactly what he wanted. Exactly what he'd fought to protect. The highway entrance came into view, and Daniel's gaze drifted to the pedestrians on the sidewalk, commuters heading home, delivery workers navigating the crowd, teenagers laughing as they walked. His mind was already moving ahead to dinner reservations when a figure caught his attention. A woman was walking along the edge of the sidewalk, moving carefully toward the highway on-ramp. She carried something pressed against her chest. No, 2 somethings. Babies. Twins. From the positioning, one strapped in a carrier against her torso, the other cradled in her arms. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she moved with cautious, deliberate steps. Even from this distance, even with her face partially obscured, Daniel recognized the way she held her shoulders, the graceful curve of her neck, the particular way she angled her head when concentrating. Maya Rivers, his ex-fiancée, the woman he had loved deeply and left behind exactly 13 months ago. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Maya paused on the sidewalk as one of the babies began to fuss. She shifted her weight, adjusting both infants with practiced ease, and Daniel saw her lips moving, singing or humming something he couldn't hear. The crying stopped almost immediately, and she continued walking, her expression serene despite the obvious weight in her arms. Daniel. Vanessa's voice seemed to come from underwater. The light's about to change. He couldn't move, couldn't think. His mind was calculating, counting backward, doing math that made his throat close. 13 months since their breakup. The babies looked around 5 months old. The timing was impossible to ignore. Maya disappeared around the corner onto the highway entrance, and the car behind Daniel honked impatiently. He pressed the accelerator too hard, the Mercedes lurching forward. Whoa, Vanessa laughed nervously. You okay? Daniel's breath came shallow and fast. Had Maya been pregnant when they separated? Had she known and chosen not to tell him? Or had she discovered it afterward and made the decision to handle it alone? The questions multiplied, each one sharp as broken glass. But underneath them all was a single, devastating realization. The woman he thought he knew completely had become a mother. She was raising 2 children, possibly his children, without him, and she had looked calm, peaceful, like someone who had found exactly what she was meant to be doing. Daniel, seriously, what's wrong? Vanessa touched his arm. Did you see something? He forced his face into a neutral expression, but his hands were still trembling. Sorry, just someone I used to know. An ex. Vanessa's tone was light, but her eyes had sharpened. It was nothing, he lied. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. He remembered the conversation they'd had 3 weeks before their breakup, the one where Maya had mentioned wanting children someday. Not immediately, she'd said, but eventually. A family. Something permanent. Daniel had been honest, brutally honest. He'd told her he couldn't imagine his life that way. That children meant sacrifice, meant giving up the freedom he'd fought to build. That his company was his legacy, and he needed to focus completely. Maya had listened quietly. She hadn't argued or tried to change his mind. She'd simply nodded, and a few weeks later, when he'd said he thought they wanted different things, she'd agreed. The breakup had been civil, mature, 2 adults acknowledging incompatibility and walking away with dignity intact. It had been the cleanest ending of his life. But now, seeing her with those babies, Daniel wondered if clean had actually meant cowardly. He pulled into the underground garage of their building, his movements mechanical. Vanessa was already unbuckling her seatbelt, talking about which dress to wear to dinner, but her voice sounded distant, muffled. Daniel sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at his hands on the steering wheel. One of those babies had grabbed something with tiny fingers. He'd seen it from the car. The movement had been so natural, so impossibly real. Are you coming? Vanessa stood by her door, waiting. Daniel climbed out slowly, feeling like he was moving through water. He'd chosen this life deliberately. The penthouse apartment with its glass walls and imported furniture. The fiancée who fit perfectly into his world without demanding he change. The freedom to work 80-hour weeks without guilt. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? As they rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, Vanessa scrolled through more venue options, but Daniel couldn't focus. All he could see was Maya's face in profile, serene and strong, walking alone with 2 infants toward a highway entrance. The elevator doors opened to their penthouse, and Vanessa headed straight for the wine fridge, still talking about wedding plans. Daniel moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, in a smaller apartment without this view, Maya was probably settling those babies to sleep, singing to them, caring for them alone. The city lights blurred in his vision. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a successful man in an expensive suit, standing in a multi-million-dollar apartment, engaged to a beautiful woman who asked for nothing he couldn't easily give. He had everything. So why did it suddenly feel like nothing? One question echoed in his mind, drowning out Vanessa's voice, drowning out the hum of the city below. What if the life he had been so determined to avoid was the only one worth living? Maya Rivers shifted baby Ethan to her left arm as she unlocked the door to her modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. The late evening light filtered through the second-hand curtains she'd hung herself during her 7th month of pregnancy, casting soft shadows across the hardwood floors that creaked in familiar places. Baby Sophie stirred against her chest in the carrier, making soft cooing sounds. The apartment was nothing like the penthouse she had once visited with Daniel. No panoramic city views, no automated everything, no marble or chrome or the kind of silence that money could buy. But it was hers. Every piece of furniture chosen carefully from thrift stores and online marketplaces. Every wall painted in soft, warm colors she'd selected because she believed children should grow up surrounded by light, not cold luxury. She settled both babies into their shared crib, a decision born of necessity, but one that had become her favorite sight. Ethan immediately reached for his sister's hand, their tiny fingers intertwining in the way that never failed to make Maya's heart ache with fierce protectiveness. 5 months. 5 months of sleepless nights and learning to change 2 diapers simultaneously. 5 months of singing lullabies at 3 a.m. while bouncing babies who seemed to take turns refusing sleep. 5 months of a love so intense it sometimes left her breathless. 5 months of not once regretting her decision to keep Daniel's paternity a secret. Maya moved to the kitchen, a compact space where she had learned to prepare formula bottles with mechanical precision. The refrigerator was covered with appointment cards, pediatrician visits, vaccination schedules, a Mommy and Me music class she couldn't really afford but attended anyway because Ethan and Sophie deserved every opportunity. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger sister, Nicole. "Coffee tomorrow? I'll bring bagels and my sanity." Maya smiled as she typed back, "If you don't mind baby chaos." They're going through a screaming phase. Nicole's response was immediate. "Babies scream. Sisters listen." 10 a.m.? Perfect. This was Maya's support system now. Her sister Nicole, who drove from New Jersey every weekend. Her neighbor Mrs. Chun, who sometimes watched the babies when Maya had client video calls. And Dr. Patel, the pediatrician who had become something close to a friend after seeing Maya navigate every appointment alone. A small circle, but solid. She tested the formula temperature against her wrist, remembering how Daniel used to tease her about being overly cautious. "You research coffee shops like you're planning a military operation," he'd said once, laughing. He hadn't understood that careful planning wasn't anxiety. It was love. It was caring enough about outcomes to invest time beforehand. Sophie's cry pierced the quiet, followed immediately by Ethan's sympathetic wails. Maya moved with practiced efficiency, scooping them both up and settling into the rocking chair that had been her grandmother's. The chair creaked softly as she began to feed Sophie while Ethan nestled against her shoulder, his cries subsiding into contented snuffles. This was the moment she had feared most during pregnancy. The overwhelming responsibility of caring for two lives entirely dependent on her. But instead of drowning, she had discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Every sleepless night managed alone. Every doctor's appointment navigated without a partner. Every milestone celebrated with no one but her babies as witnesses. Each experience had built something unshakable inside her. Her laptop sat open on the coffee table, cursor blinking in an unfinished marketing proposal. Maya worked remotely for a small consulting firm, a job that paid less than her previous position but offered the flexibility she desperately needed. Her phone rang. Her boss, Jennifer. "Maya, I know it's after hours, but the Reynolds account just came back with changes. Any chance you could handle them by Monday?" Maya looked at the babies in her arms, at the laundry basket overflowing in the corner, at the stack of bills on her kitchen counter. "Of course," she said. "Send them over. You're a lifesaver. I honestly don't know how you manage everything." Neither do I sometimes, Maya thought. But what she said was, "You do what you have to do." After hanging up, she continued rocking, watching the way the fading light changed across her babies' faces. Ethan had Daniel's strong jawline, already visible even at 5 months. His dark eyes were identical to his father's. Sophie had inherited Maya's heart-shaped face and stubborn chin, but her nose was all Daniel. They were beautiful, healthy, completely unaware that their father was one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in America. Maya had Googled Daniel exactly twice since their breakup. The first time was 3 weeks after she discovered she was pregnant, sitting in her obstetrician's office. The search results showed him at a charity gala, looking successful and confident, with an elegant blonde woman on his arm. The second time was 2 months ago, when Ethan had been sick with RSV and Maya had spent 48 hours in the hospital, terrified and alone. She'd pulled up Daniel's company website at 3 a.m., staring at his professional headshot, wondering if she was being selfish. Both times, she'd closed the browser and chosen silence. The decision hadn't been made lightly. For weeks after discovering her pregnancy, Maya had crafted and deleted dozens of messages to Daniel. She had driven past his office building 3 times, sitting in the parking lot while rehearsing conversations that always ended the same way, with him offering financial support, but not emotional investment. Daniel had been honest about not wanting children. He had never pretended otherwise. The breakup had been initiated by him, but it had been mutual in the end because they both recognized they wanted fundamentally different lives. So why would a pregnancy change that? Maya had chosen to believe that forcing someone to be a father was no gift to anyone, especially not to the children involved. Ethan and Sophie deserved a parent who chose them wholeheartedly, not someone fulfilling an obligation out of guilt. As if sensing her thoughts, Ethan opened his dark eyes and gazed at her with solemn attention. Maya traced his tiny eyebrow with her finger. I made the right choice, she whispered to him. Someday you'll understand. But even as she said it, a small voice in her mind wondered if protection could sometimes be another word for selfishness. Was she really protecting her children from an unwilling father, or was she protecting herself from potential rejection? The sun had set completely now, and the apartment was filled with soft shadows. Maya stood carefully, settling both babies back in their crib, and moved to close the blinds. Through the window, she could see the Manhattan skyline glittering in the distance, a world of wealth and power she had briefly touched and then chosen to leave behind. Somewhere in one of those towers, Daniel was probably having an expensive dinner with his beautiful fiancée, planning a wedding, living the uncomplicated life he'd always wanted. Maya pulled the curtains closed, shutting out the view. She had made her choice. He had made his. And her twins would grow up surrounded by love, even if it came from only one parent. That would have to be enough. Daniel stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and white. Behind him, Vanessa had fallen asleep on the leather sectional, her iPad still glowing with wedding venue photos. The dinner reservation had been forgotten. She'd stopped asking questions after the third time he'd said he was fine. He wasn't fine. His mind kept replaying the same 5-second loop. Maya walking toward the highway. The babies in her arms. The serene expression on her face. The way one infant had reached up to touch her cheek, and she'd smiled. That private, tender smile he remembered from mornings when she thought he was still asleep. Daniel pulled out his phone and opened the calendar app, scrolling backward. Their breakup had been March 15th, 13 months ago. He remembered the date because it had been the Ides of March, and Maya had made a sad joke about betrayal that he'd pretended not to understand. If she'd been pregnant then, his fingers moved across the calculator app. 13 months ago. 40 weeks of pregnancy. The babies looked about 5 months old now. The math worked perfectly. Too perfectly. Daniel's chest tightened. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Maya had sat across from him at their favorite Italian restaurant that night, her hands folded on the white tablecloth, and listened while he explained, rationally, calmly, why they wanted different things. I can't give you the life you're imagining, he'd said. The house in the suburbs. The kids. The family dinners. That's not who I am, Maya. My company is at a critical expansion phase. I need to focus completely. She had been so quiet, so composed. Her eyes had filled with tears, but she'd blinked them back and nodded. I understand, she'd said softly. You're right. We want different things. Had she known then? Had she been sitting there, pregnant with his children, listening to him explain why he couldn't be a father, and chosen to say nothing? Or had she discovered it later and decided he'd made his choice clear enough? Daniel turned away from the window, pacing. 1,200 square feet of imported marble and custom furniture. Not a single toy. Not a single photograph of anyone but himself and Vanessa. His phone buzzed. A text from his COO about the Tokyo acquisition. Daniel stared at it, the words refusing to form meaning. 6 months ago, this deal would have consumed his attention completely. Now it felt like noise. He opened his laptop instead, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He could search for Maya, find her address, show up at her door, and demand to know the truth. But what if the truth was worse than uncertainty? What if she confirmed the children were his, and told him she didn't want him in their lives? That he'd made his priorities clear, and she'd rather raise them alone than expose them to a father who chose board meetings over birthdays? Daniel closed the laptop and moved to the bar, pouring scotch he didn't drink. The glass sat untouched while he stared at his reflection in the darkened television screen. You're thinking about her. Daniel turned. Vanessa stood in the doorway, barefoot, her hair mussed from sleep. Her expression was unreadable. I'm thinking about work, he lied. You're a terrible liar. Vanessa crossed her arms. You've been distracted since you saw that woman. Who is she? Daniel set down the glass. Someone I used to know. Someone you used to love? The question hung in the air between them. It was a long time ago, Daniel said carefully. 13 months. Vanessa's voice was sharp. Because that's how long we've been together, Daniel. And I've never seen you look the way you looked at that woman today. I wasn't looking at her. I was just surprised. Don't. Vanessa held up a hand. Don't insult me by pretending. I may not be a genius like you, but I'm not stupid. You saw someone from your past. and suddenly everything about our present feels wrong to you. Daniel opened his mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. She was right. Since that moment at the traffic light, his carefully constructed life had started to feel like a stage set, beautiful but hollow. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Do you love me? The question should have been easy. They were engaged, planning a wedding, building a future together. But Daniel's throat closed around the words. I care about you, he said finally. You're intelligent, beautiful, everything I thought I wanted. Thought. Vanessa's voice broke. Past tense. Vanessa. No, it's fine. Actually, it's perfect. She laughed bitterly, wiping her eyes. I should have known. You proposed after 11 months because it was the logical next step, not because you couldn't imagine your life without me. I was the safe choice. The uncomplicated choice. That's not fair, isn't it? Vanessa pulled the engagement ring from her finger. The diamond caught the light as she set it on the bar between them. I deserve someone who looks at me the way you looked at her today. Like his whole world just shifted. Daniel stared at the ring, feeling like he should protest, should fight to fix this, but instead feeling only relief. I'm sorry, he said quietly. So am I. Vanessa collected her iPad and purse. I'll have my things moved out this weekend. You can keep the wedding deposits. She walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, she said without turning around, I hope those babies aren't yours. Because if they are, and you walk away again, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. The door closed softly behind her. Daniel stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by everything he'd thought he wanted, with the sudden terrible clarity that he'd built his entire life around avoiding the one thing that might have made him whole. He picked up his phone and opened a new browser tab. His fingers typed, Private Investigator Manhattan. He told himself he just needed facts, just needed to know for certain. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was terrified that those babies were his, and even more terrified that Maya would never forgive him for not being there from the beginning. The private investigator's office was in a converted brownstone in Chelsea. Marcus Webb was younger than Daniel expected, maybe mid-30s, wearing jeans and a button-down with rolled-up sleeves. Mr. Brooks. Marcus stood to shake his hand. Please sit. Can I get you anything? I'm fine. Daniel sat, his hands gripping the armrests. How long will this take? That depends on what you're looking for. Marcus settled behind his desk, opening a laptop. Your assistant said you needed information about Maya Rivers. Current address, employment, family situation. Is this personal? Personal. Daniel's throat felt tight. We used to be engaged. I saw her recently, and I need to know. I need to confirm some things. Does Ms. Rivers know you're looking into her situation? No. And you understand that any information I gather is for your knowledge only? I'm not trying to hurt her, Daniel said, his voice sharper than intended. I just need to know if, he stopped. She had children. Twins. I need to know when they were born, and if. Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. You think they might be yours? Daniel nodded. I can have preliminary information in 48 hours, Marcus said. Full report within a week. But Mr. Brooks, have you considered just talking to Ms. Rivers directly? No. The word came out too fast. May I ask why not? Because I'm terrified, Daniel thought. Because what if she tells me they're mine and that I'm not welcome? It's complicated, he said instead. Marcus studied him, then nodded. All right. I'll start with public records, birth certificates, property records, employment verification. Just the basics, Daniel said. I need to know the truth. Truth has a way of being more complicated than we expect, Marcus said quietly. But I'll get you your answers. The next 48 hours were the longest of Daniel's life. He threw himself into work, staying at the office until midnight. Anything to avoid the empty penthouse and the thoughts that consumed him there. On the third day, Marcus called. I have your report. Would you like to come to the office? I'm coming now. Daniel made the 20-minute drive in 12, parking illegally. Marcus was waiting, a manila folder on his desk. Before I show you this, Marcus said carefully, I want to remind you that information creates responsibility. Once you know, you can't unknow. Just give me the folder. Marcus slid it across the desk. Daniel's hands shook as he opened it. The first page showed 2 birth certificates printed side by side. Ethan James Rivers. Born October 18th. 5 pounds 3 ounces. Sophie Marie Rivers. Born October 18th. 4 pounds 11 ounces. Daniel's vision blurred. October 18th. 40 weeks before that was mid-January. He and Maya had been together. They'd gone skiing in Vermont, stayed in a cabin with a fireplace. He turned to the next page. Photographs from a pediatrician's office. 2 babies, maybe 3 months old. The boy, Ethan, had Daniel's dark eyes. His strong eyebrows. The resemblance was unmistakable. The girl, Sophie, had Maya's delicate features, but her nose, her chin, all Daniel. Jesus, he whispered. There's more, Marcus said quietly. Employment records. Maya worked remotely for a small marketing consulting firm. Salary, $52,000 annually. Medical records, billing statements. Maya had attended every prenatal appointment alone. She'd paid out of pocket for a significant portion of her care. Hospital bills from the birth, which had been premature and required a week in the NICU. Total cost, $87,000. Amount paid, $87,000. She'd paid it all herself. The next page showed her apartment lease. A 2-bedroom in Brooklyn. Rent, $2,100 monthly. She's doing it alone, Daniel said hollowly. Raising twins on $52,000 a year in New York City. She appears to be managing, Marcus said. Though just barely. No car. Public transportation. Generic formula. Her sister visits weekly. Daniel felt sick. While he'd been closing billion-dollar deals, Maya had been navigating premature labor alone. Spending sleepless nights in a NICU, terrified. Working remotely while caring for infants. There's one more thing, Marcus said gently. I found her credit card statements from last year. In February, about a month after your breakup, there's a charge to a women's health clinic. Daniel looked up sharply. She knew, Marcus said. She found out she was pregnant about a month after you separated. There's also a charge to a family law attorney the same week. Daniel's chest constricted. She'd known for over a year. Through her entire pregnancy, through the birth, through 5 months of raising them alone, she'd known, and she'd chosen silence. Why? His voice cracked. Why wouldn't she tell me? Marcus closed his laptop. That's not something I can answer. But if I had to guess, she protected you from a choice you'd already made clear you didn't want to face. The question is, what are you going to do now? Daniel stared at the photographs of Ethan and Sophie, his children, 2 people who existed because of him and had been living without him for 5 months. I don't know, Daniel whispered. God help me, I don't know. Daniel sat in his car outside Maya's apartment building for 45 minutes, the investigator's folder on the passenger seat beside him. He'd driven here directly, operating on pure adrenaline, but now his courage had evaporated. The building was older, well-maintained but modest. A small playground occupied the courtyard. This was where his children lived. He was about to start the car and drive away when the building's front door opened and Maya emerged. She wore jeans and an oversized cardigan, her dark hair in a messy bun. A double stroller navigated ahead of her, 2 small forms bundled against the October cold. Maya was talking to them, her face animated. She turned toward the bodega, and Daniel made a split-second decision. He got out of the car. Maya, she froze mid-step, her hand tightening on the stroller. For 3 heartbeats, she didn't turn around. When she finally did, her face had gone completely pale. Daniel. His name came out barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? He crossed the sidewalk, his eyes drawn to the stroller. From this angle, he could see them. 2 babies in matching blue jackets. One asleep, one staring up at the sky with dark, serious eyes. His children. I saw you, Daniel said. Last week. On the highway. Maya's jaw tightened. So you decided to stalk me? I decided to find out the truth. His voice came out harsh. Were you ever going to tell me? People were passing on the sidewalk, glancing curiously. Maya's face flushed, but her voice remained steady. Tell you what exactly? Don't. Daniel took a step closer. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. I saw them, Maya. I saw the twins. And I did the math. Something flickered in Maya's eyes. Fear, anger, resignation. You should leave, she said quietly. Are they mine? The question burst out of him, raw and desperate. I need to hear you say it. Maya's hands gripped the stroller so tightly her knuckles went white. For a moment, Daniel thought she might refuse to answer, might simply turn and walk away. Then she looked directly at him, and he saw everything in her eyes. The exhaustion, the fierce protectiveness, the hurt he'd caused. Yes, she said simply. They're yours. The confirmation hit him like a physical blow. Daniel's knees nearly buckled. He reached out to steady himself against a nearby car. Why? His voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Maya's laugh was bitter. You're seriously asking me that? You, who sat across from me at Vincenzo's and explained in excruciating detail why you never wanted children. Who told me your company was your legacy? Who ended our engagement because I wanted a future you couldn't give me? You should have told me anyway. Daniel's voice rose. The baby who'd been awake started to cry. I had a right to know. You had a right? Maya's eyes blazed. You gave up your rights when you chose your empire over everything else. When you made it crystal clear that fatherhood was a burden you had no interest in carrying. I wasn't about to force you into a role you explicitly didn't want. That wasn't your decision to make. Yes, it was. Maya's voice shook. It was exactly my decision to make. You ended things, Daniel. You walked away. And when I found out I was pregnant a month later, I had to decide. Do I drag you back into my life and watch you resent me and these babies? Or do I raise them alone, surrounded by love instead of obligation? The baby's crying intensified. Maya immediately bent to the stroller, lifting out a small form bundled in blue. She cradled the infant against her chest, rocking gently, humming something soft. The baby quieted almost immediately, tiny fingers curling into Maya's cardigan. Daniel stared at them, at Maya's practiced movements, at the way the baby trusted her completely, at the life she'd built without him. Let me see them, he said hoarsely. Please. Just let me see them up close. Maya's expression was unreadable. For a long moment, she simply studied his face, searching. 5 minutes, she finally said. And then you leave. She turned toward the building entrance. Daniel grabbed the stroller, folding it awkwardly and carrying it up the stairs behind her. Inside, the apartment was small but warm. Bright yellow walls. Second-hand furniture arranged with care. Books everywhere. A soft play mat covered most of the living room floor, scattered with simple toys. Maya settled both babies onto the mat, removing their jackets with efficient movements. They immediately reached for each other, tiny hands grasping. That's Ethan, Maya said quietly, pointing to the boy. And Sophie. Daniel knelt beside the mat, his hands trembling. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Ethan had his eyes, his eyebrows, the small dimple in his chin. Sophie had Maya's delicate features, but Daniel's coloring. They were perfect. Without thinking, Daniel reached out. Ethan's tiny fingers wrapped around his index finger, gripping with surprising strength. The contact shattered something inside Daniel's chest. This was his son, his daughter. These were his children, and they'd been in the world for 5 months without him. Sophie chose that moment to smile, a wide, gummy grin. Daniel felt tears burning his eyes. They're beautiful, he whispered. Yes, Maya said from behind him. They are. Daniel looked up at her. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression guarded but no longer angry. Just tired. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry, Maya. For everything. For not being there. For making you go through this alone. Your 5 minutes are up, Maya said quietly. You should go. Maya, please. Her voice broke slightly. Just, please go. Daniel stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He looked back at Ethan and Sophie one more time, committing their faces to memory. Then he walked to the door. With his hand on the knob, he turned back. This isn't over, he said. I'm their father. Whether you like it or not, I'm their father, and I'm not walking away again. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. Then prove it, she said. Because right now, all you are is a stranger who shares their DNA. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Daniel stood in the hallway, his chest heaving, his world fundamentally altered. He'd come for answers. He'd found something infinitely more complicated, responsibility. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Daniel Brooks had absolutely no idea what to do next. Daniel didn't leave. He stood in the hallway outside Maya's apartment for a full minute, staring at the scuffed door with the brass number 3C hanging slightly crooked. Behind that door were his children. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. What was he doing? Maya had told him to leave. Walking back and would be crossing a boundary she'd clearly established. But his feet wouldn't move toward the stairs. Inside, he heard Sophie start to cry. He heard Maya's soft murmur, the sound of her moving around, comforting her with that practiced ease she'd had 5 months to perfect. 5 months of moments he'd missed. 5 months of Maya doing this alone while he'd been chasing deals and planning a wedding to a woman he didn't love. Daniel knocked before he could stop himself. The door opened immediately. Maya stood there with Sophie against her shoulder, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "I thought you left," she said. "I tried." Daniel's voice came out rough. "I got to the stairs and I couldn't." "Maya, please. Just a few more minutes." "Daniel." "I held my son's hand," he interrupted. For 30 seconds, I held Ethan's hand, and it was the most real thing I've felt in over a year. "Please don't make me leave yet." Maya's resolve seemed to waver. Sophie whimpered, and she automatically adjusted her hold, swaying slightly. 10 more minutes, Maya finally said, stepping back. "But then you really do have to go. They need to eat and sleep, and I have work deadlines." Daniel followed her back inside. Ethan was still on the play mat, his dark eyes tracking a mobile above him. When Daniel knelt beside him again, Ethan's gaze shifted, focusing on Daniel's face. "Can I?" Daniel hesitated. "Can I hold him?" Maya studied him, then nodded. "Support his head. He doesn't have full neck control yet." Daniel's hands shook as he slid them under Ethan's small body, lifting him carefully. The baby was so light, so fragile, warm and solid and impossibly real against Daniel's chest. Ethan made a small sound, and his tiny hand came up to rest against Daniel's shirt. Something inside Daniel's chest cracked open. All his life, he believed control was everything. He'd built an empire on the principle that if you managed every variable, you could design the perfect life. But holding his son, feeling that tiny heartbeat against his own, Daniel realized that everything he'd thought mattered, the billions, the deals, the carefully curated existence, was just noise. This was real. This small person who shared his DNA, who had his eyes, who existed because of a weekend in Vermont when snow fell outside a cabin window. This was what mattered. "He likes you," Maya said quietly. She'd settled into the rocking chair with Sophie, preparing a bottle. "He doesn't usually calm down that quickly with strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Daniel said, his voice thick. "I'm his father." Maya's hands paused on the bottle. "Being a father is more than genetics, Daniel." "I know." He looked up at her. "I know I haven't earned it yet, but I want to." "God, Maya, I want to try." Sophie finished her bottle and immediately began to fuss. Maya stood and came to trade babies with Daniel. "Here, you try with Sophie. I'll take Ethan." The transition was awkward. Daniel wasn't sure how to hold the bottle at the right angle, and Sophie seemed to sense his inexperience. She pushed against it, turning her head away, whimpering. "Angle it up more," Maya instructed, "and hold her closer. Babies like to feel secure." Daniel adjusted, drawing Sophie closer against his chest, tilting the bottle. This time, she latched on, her blue-green eyes, so much like Maya's, fixed on his face as she drank. Her tiny hand rested against the bottle, fingers splaying and curling. "There you go," Maya said softly. "You're getting it." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, just the sound of babies drinking and the creak of the rocking chair. Through the window, the city hummed, but here in this small apartment, time seemed to slow. "They were born premature," Maya said suddenly. 6 weeks early. I went into labor at a work meeting. One minute I was presenting a campaign strategy. The next minute my water broke. Daniel's chest tightened. "Were you scared?" "Terrified." Maya's voice was quiet. "The NICU doctor said their lungs weren't fully developed. Said we'd have to wait and see." I spent a week sleeping in a chair between their incubators, listening to machines beep, praying they'd keep breathing. "You should have called me," Daniel whispered. "And said what?" Maya looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Come to the hospital because the children you explicitly said you never wanted are fighting to stay alive? That's not fair to anyone, Daniel." Sophie had finished her bottle. Daniel lifted her to his shoulder the way he'd seen Maya do it, patting her back gently. To his amazement, Sophie let out a small burp, then nestled against his neck with a contented sigh. The feeling was indescribable. This tiny person, his daughter, trusting him completely, fitting perfectly into the space between his shoulder and his heart, like she belonged there. Maybe she did belong there. Maybe this was what he'd been missing all along. Not control or freedom or carefully managed simplicity, but this messy, complicated, overwhelming love that demanded everything and gave back more than you knew existed. "I was wrong," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "About everything. About what I wanted. About what mattered." About what kind of life was worth living. Maya stood, carrying Ethan to the crib in the corner. She laid him down gently, and he immediately rolled to his side, his eyes already closing. When she turned back to Daniel, her expression was guarded. Realizations are easy, Daniel. It's the follow-through that's hard. Then let me follow through. He stood carefully, still holding Sophie. Tell me what to do? How to be what they need. It's not about what they need right now, Maya said, taking Sophie from his arms and placing her beside her brother. Both babies settled immediately, their hands finding each other even in sleep. It's about what they'll need in a year, in 5 years, in 10. It's about showing up for soccer games and parent-teacher conferences and stomach flu at 2 a.m. It's about being present even when it's boring or hard or interferes with your billion-dollar deals. She turned to face him fully, her arms crossed. Can you do that, Daniel? Can you really choose them over everything else you've built? Because if you can't, if there's even a chance you'll disappear when it gets inconvenient, then I need you to walk away now. Before they're old enough to remember you. Before they can be hurt by your absence. Daniel looked at the crib, at his children sleeping peacefully, their small chests rising and falling in perfect sync. I can do it, he said. I will do it. Whatever it takes. Maya's expression didn't change. Words are easy, Daniel. Then let me prove it. He moved toward her. Tell me what you need. Tell me how to start. For a moment, he thought she might soften. Instead, she walked to the door and opened it. This doesn't mean anything yet, she said quietly. Feeling moved by your children is basic biology. Being their father takes more than emotion. It takes action, consistency, sacrifice. Daniel nodded, understanding the dismissal for what it was, a test, a challenge. I'll prove it, he said. I promise. Don't promise me anything, Maya replied. Promise them. She closed the door behind him, leaving Daniel alone in the hallway with his world forever changed and absolutely no idea how to rebuild it. But for the first time in his life, the uncertainty didn't terrify him. It felt like purpose. Daniel couldn't sleep. He'd returned to his penthouse, but the space felt wrong. Too large, too cold, too empty. He'd paced for hours, his mind replaying every moment. Ethan's grip on his finger. Sophie's contented sigh against his neck. The way both babies had reached for each other in their sleep. His children. The words had shifted from foreign to fundamental in the span of 2 hours. At 2 a.m., Daniel was sitting at his dining table, searching for information about infant development, when his phone rang. An unknown number. Daniel Brooks, he answered. Mr. Brooks, this is Marcus Webb. I know it's late, but someone's been asking questions about my investigation. Daniel sat up straighter. What kind of questions? A law firm representing Maya Rivers contacted me, wanting to know who hired me to look into her life. They're not happy. I suspect you'll be hearing from them shortly. Daniel's stomach dropped. What did you tell them? I confirmed that a client hired me for background research, but didn't release your name. However, Ms. Rivers is clearly aware someone invaded her privacy. The call came 3 hours later, just as gray light was filtering through the penthouse windows. Maya's voice was cold, controlled, angrier than he'd ever heard it. You hired a private investigator. Not a question, an accusation. Maya, I can explain. You crossed a line. Her voice shook with fury. You dug into my medical records, my finances, my private life. You stalked me, Daniel. You stalked the mother of your children instead of just asking me directly. I needed to know the truth. No, she cut him off. You needed to feel in control. You needed information you could analyze on your terms, without having to actually be vulnerable or trust me. Daniel closed his eyes, shame burning through him. She was right. I'm sorry, he said. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. You should have come to me. You should have respected me enough to have an honest conversation. Instead, you violated my privacy and confirmed every fear I had about why I shouldn't tell you in the first place. Maya, please. I'm going to say this once, Daniel, so listen carefully. Her voice was steady now, harder than steel. If you want to be part of Ethan and Sophie's lives, it's all or nothing. You don't get to be a part-time father who shows up when it's convenient and disappears when it interferes with your empire. You don't get to buy your way into their lives with money or gifts. I don't want to. Let me finish. She took a breath. You show up consistently, or you don't show up at all. You prioritize them over board meetings and business trips, or you walk away now. You be the father they deserve, present, patient, committed, or you sign away your parental rights and let me raise them in peace. There's no middle ground. Not with my children. The ultimatum hung between them, stark and uncompromising. I choose them, Daniel said immediately. I choose to be their father. Choosing is easy at 5 a.m. when you're feeling guilty. The question is whether you'll still choose them in 6 months when you have a deal in Tokyo and Sophie has an ear infection. Whether you'll choose them when Ethan needs to be picked up from daycare and you have investors waiting. I will. Then prove it. Maya's voice softened slightly. Don't call me. Don't show up at my apartment. Go figure out what kind of father you want to be. What you're willing to sacrifice. What kind of life you're willing to build. And when you know, when you're absolutely certain, then come back and we'll talk about co-parenting. She hung up. Daniel stared at his phone, his reflection ghosted in the dark screen. The penthouse stretched around him, 3,000 square feet of luxury and loneliness. What was he willing to sacrifice? Everything, he realized. He was willing to sacrifice everything. The next morning, Daniel called an emergency board meeting. His executives filed and looking concerned. His CFO had flown in from Chicago. His COO had canceled a meeting with shareholders. Thank you all for coming, Daniel began. I'm going to be direct. Effective immediately, I'm stepping back from daily operations. Silence. Then everyone spoke at once. What? Is there a health issue? Are you selling the company? Daniel held up a hand. I'm not selling. I'm not dying. But I've recently learned I'm a father to 5-month-old twins, and they need me more than this company does. His COO, Sarah Chun, leaned back. Daniel, that's wonderful news. Congratulations. But stepping back entirely seems extreme. We can adjust your schedule. No. Daniel's voice was firm. I've spent 15 years building this company. I've sacrificed relationships, sleep, health, and apparently fatherhood in the process. That ends now. Sarah, I'm promoting you to CEO. I'll remain as chairman, attending quarterly board meetings and strategic planning sessions, but day-to-day operations are yours. Sarah's eyes widened. Are you sure? This is your company. Your vision. My vision was always about creating something that could run without me, Daniel said. Turns out, I just needed the right motivation to let it. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Legal details were discussed. Compensation packages adjusted. Press releases drafted. By the time everyone filed out, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. That evening, Daniel listed his penthouse for sale. 3,000 square feet, 42nd floor, Central Park views, gone. He canceled his trip to Singapore. He called his assistant and instructed her to clear his calendar of everything except quarterly board meetings. Standing in his soon-to-be former home, surrounded by expensive furniture and the life he'd carefully curated, Daniel felt the weight of his decision settle over him. He was terrified. He was also more certain than he'd ever been about anything. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. I heard about the board meeting. Are you okay? Daniel typed back. I'm better than okay. Thank you for letting me go. Her response came quickly. You would have let yourself go eventually. I just sped up the timeline. I hope your babies know how lucky they are. Daniel looked around the empty penthouse one last time. Ethan and Sophie didn't have a father yet. They had a man who was trying to become worthy of the title. But he would get there, even if it meant dismantling everything he'd built to do it. The real estate agent looked confused. Mr. Brooks, I need to make sure I understand. You want to sell your penthouse and buy a 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, near Prospect Park. That's correct, Daniel said. May I ask why? The Brooklyn property is worth roughly a quarter of what you'd get for the penthouse. Because my children live in Brooklyn, Daniel thought. Because I need to be close enough to be there in 10 minutes if Maya calls. Personal reasons, he said aloud. How quickly can we close? Given your financial position, we could close in 2 weeks if you pay cash. Do it. Over the next 3 weeks, Daniel systematically dismantled the life he'd spent 15 years building. Not destroying it, reconstructing it. The penthouse sold in 5 days, to a tech CEO who didn't negotiate. Daniel donated most of the furniture to charity, keeping only what would fit in his new apartment. A bed, a desk, his grandmother's rocking chair he'd kept in storage. The Brooklyn apartment was modest by his standards. 1,800 square feet. 3rd floor walk-up, exposed brick and hardwood floors. But it had 3 bedrooms, and the building had a small playground in the courtyard. The lease on the unit next door was also available, and Daniel signed that too, planning to eventually convert it into a proper space for the twins. His business associates thought he'd lost his mind. "You're throwing away everything you've built," his former college roommate said. "For what? A woman who won't even talk to you." "For my children," Daniel corrected. "And I'm not throwing anything away. I'm putting it in proper perspective." He started attending a parenting class for new fathers at the community center 3 blocks from Maya's apartment. The other men were mostly in their 20s and 30s, sleep-deprived and overwhelmed, sharing stories about diaper blowouts and 3 a.m. crying sessions. Daniel listened and took notes like he was studying for the most important exam of his life. He learned about wake windows and sleep training, about tummy time and developmental milestones, about the importance of reading aloud and skin-to-skin contact, about how babies needed routine and patience and presence more than they needed expensive toys or designer nurseries. He bought books, The Whole Brain Child, No Drama Discipline, The Wonder Weeks. He read them at night in his new apartment, which still echoed with emptiness, but felt more like home than the penthouse ever had. He started therapy. "I'm trying to become someone I've never been," he told Dr. Morrison during their second session. "A father, a co-parent, someone who puts other people's needs first." "Why now?" Dr. Morrison asked. "What changed?" Daniel thought about Ethan's grip on his finger, Sophie's sigh against his neck. "I held them," he said simply. "And I realized everything I thought I wanted was just me running from what I actually needed, which was purpose that matters, love that costs something, a life that's bigger than my own comfort." Dr. Morrison made a note. "That's profound growth, Daniel. But growth is uncomfortable. It requires grieving who you were to become who you need to be. Are you prepared for that?" Daniel looked out the window at Brooklyn stretching below, Maya's neighborhood visible in the distance. "I don't have a choice," he said. "My children deserve better than who I was. So I have to become someone better." 6 weeks after seeing Maya on the highway, Daniel stood in his new apartment, boxes still unpacked, and realized he'd changed everything about his life. But he still hadn't heard from Maya. She'd told him not to call, not to show up, to figure out who he wanted to be first. He'd done that. He'd reorganized his entire existence around being worthy of fatherhood. But was it enough? His phone buzzed. "Nicole, Maya's sister." "Daniel? It's Nicole. Maya doesn't know I'm calling, but I think you should know. Ethan has pneumonia. They admitted him to the hospital this morning. Maya's been there alone for 8 hours." Daniel's blood went cold. "Which hospital?" "Brooklyn Methodist." "But Daniel." He was already grabbing his keys. "She might not want you there." "I don't care," Daniel said. "My son is sick. I'm going." He made the drive in 7 minutes, parking illegally and running through the hospital entrance. The pediatric floor receptionist initially refused to give him the room number. He wasn't on the approved visitor list. "I'm his father," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "Please." Something in his desperation must have shown, because she relented. "Room 412. But if the mother asks you to leave." "I'll leave," Daniel promised. He found the room and stopped outside the door. Through the small window, he could see Maya, sitting in a chair pulled close to a hospital crib. Ethan lay hooked to monitors, an oxygen tube in his tiny nose. Maya held his hand, her head bowed, lips moving in what might have been prayer. Daniel knocked softly. Maya's head snapped up. For a moment, her expression was raw, exhausted, terrified, alone. Then she recognized him, and her face shuddered. She came to the door, slipping into the hallway and closing it behind her. "How did you know?" Her voice was flat. "Nicole called. I came as soon as I heard." Daniel could barely get the words out. "Is he okay?" "Pneumonia. They caught it early. He'll be fine." Maya crossed her arms. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." Daniel looked past her to the closed door. "He's my son. Our son. And you shouldn't have to do this alone. I've been doing everything alone for 6 months." "I know. And I'm sorry. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving. Not him, not Sophie, and not you." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "You can't just show up, Daniel. You can't just decide to be a father now that it's convenient." "Nothing about this is convenient," Daniel interrupted. "I sold my penthouse. I stepped down as CEO. I moved to Brooklyn. I've been taking parenting classes and going to therapy and reading every book I can find about infant development. I've restructured my entire life around being the father Ethan and Sophie deserve." Maya stared at him. "You what?" "I'm done running," Daniel said quietly. "I'm done choosing comfort over commitment. I'm done building an empire that means nothing compared to two tiny humans who share my DNA and need me to show up. So tell me what to do, Maya. Tell me how to help. Because I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment, Maya just looked at him, searching his face. Then she opened the door to Ethan's room. "Come in," she said. "But you're taking the overnight shift. I haven't slept in 32 hours. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. 3 months later, Daniel stood at Maya's door at 6 a.m., 2 coffee cups in hand and a bag of bagels from the shop she liked 3 blocks away. He knocked softly. He had a key now, but he still knocked. Boundaries mattered, especially when rebuilding trust. Maya opened the door. Sophie balanced on her hip, her hair in a messy bun. She looked exhausted but smiled when she saw him. "You're early. Ethan has his 9-month checkup at 9, Daniel said, stepping inside. "I figured we could have breakfast first." We had become natural over the past 3 months. Not easy. Nothing about co-parenting was easy, but natural. Daniel came over every morning, spending 2 hours with the twins while Maya showered and had quiet time. He came back in the evenings, helping with dinner and bath time. Weekends, he took both babies to his apartment, learning through trial and error how to manage 2 infants alone. The first time Ethan had cried inconsolably at 2 a.m., Daniel had called Maya in a panic. "Gas," she'd said. "Bicycle his legs and pat his back. You're doing fine." He hadn't been doing fine. He'd been terrified, but he'd figured it out, and Ethan had eventually calmed, and Daniel had felt accomplishment more meaningful than any business deal. Now, 3 months in, he could change both babies simultaneously. He knew Sophie liked her bottle warmer than Ethan did. He knew Ethan needed exactly 17 minutes of rocking before bed, while Sophie preferred to be bounced. He knew Maya took her coffee with oat milk and 1 sugar. He'd learned to be useful, to be present, to be what they needed. "How was your night?" Daniel asked, settling at the kitchen table. Sophie was up every 2 hours. "I think she's teething early." Maya sat across from him, accepting the bagel he'd already spread with cream cheese, the way she liked it, with extra on one side. "How was your week?" "Busy. The Tokyo team needed strategic guidance, so I had some late calls. But I made the board meeting yesterday. This was their routine now. Small updates. Shared meals. The comfortable domesticity of 2 people raising children together without the complications of romance. Except it wasn't quite that simple. Because somewhere in the past 3 months, between diaper changes and pediatrician visits, and watching Ethan learn to roll over, Daniel had fallen in love with Maya all over again. Not the way he'd loved her before. That had been young and romantic and built on the idea of who they could be together. This was different. This was witnessing her strength. Seeing her patience when Ethan screamed for 40 minutes straight. Watching her juggle work calls while bouncing Sophie. Admiring the way she'd built a full life from nothing. Maya was extraordinary. And Daniel was terrified she'd never let him close enough to tell her that. "Daniel." Maya was looking at him strangely. "You okay?" "You zoned out." "Sorry. Just thinking." He stood, moving to where Ethan sat in his bouncer. "Hey, buddy. Ready to see Dr. Patel today?" Ethan grinned, the first real smile he'd started giving consistently last month, and reached for Daniel's finger. Sophie finished her bottle and immediately demanded attention with her particular fussy cry. Daniel scooped her up, settling her against his shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, not looking at Maya. "About the living situation." Maya stiffened slightly. "What about it?" "The lease on the apartment next to mine is available again. I was thinking, if you wanted, we could knock through the wall. Make it one space. You and the twins could move in. Separate bedrooms, separate lives, but close. So I could help more. So you wouldn't have to do everything alone." The silence stretched long enough that Daniel finally looked up. Maya's expression was unreadable. "That's a big step. Only if you want it. No pressure." "But Maya." He shifted Sophie to look at Maya directly. "You've been carrying this alone for almost a year. Let me help carry it. Not because you need me, but because they deserve to have both parents present. Because you deserve support." "We're not getting back together," Maya said quietly. The words hurt, but Daniel nodded. "I know. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking to be a full partner in raising our children. However that looks." Maya stood, moving to the window. Outside, Brooklyn was waking up. Early morning joggers, dog walkers, the bodega opening its doors. "You've surprised me," she said finally. 3 months ago, I didn't think you'd last 2 weeks. I thought you'd realize how hard this is and disappear back to your empire. My empire doesn't need me, Daniel said. They do. You've changed. Maya turned to face him. Not just your schedule or your apartment. Something fundamental. You're different. I'm their father, Daniel said simply. That changed everything. Maya's eyes filled with tears. I spent months being angry at you. For leaving. For making me choose between honoring your wishes and telling you about your children. For building a life where there wasn't room for messy, complicated love. You had every right to be angry. But watching you these past 3 months, Maya smiled through her tears. You show up, Daniel. Every day, even when it's hard, even when it's boring, even when there's an important business call and Sophie has explosive diarrhea. Especially then, Daniel said wryly, remembering that particular incident. Maya laughed, wiping her eyes. I'm not ready to live together. Not yet. But maybe we could try family dinners. Regular dinners, at your place. With all 4 of us. I'd like that. And Daniel? Maya's voice grew softer. Thank you. For choosing them. For becoming who they needed you to be. They saved me, Daniel said honestly. I was so focused on building something impressive that I forgot to build something meaningful. Ethan and Sophie gave me purpose that matters. 6 months later, Daniel sat on the floor of his apartment, now connected to the adjoining unit, walls knocked through to create a space that felt like home. Ethan sat in his lap, babbling enthusiastically and grabbing at Daniel's nose. Sophie was with Maya in the kitchen, where dinner was cooking and music played softly. This was Daniel's life now. Not board meetings and billion-dollar deals, though he still attended the quarterly strategic sessions. Not penthouse views and society events, though he was still occasionally photographed at charity galas. This messy, chaotic, beautiful ordinary life where success was measured in first words and full nights of sleep, and the smile on Maya's face when he took both babies so she could have 30 minutes alone. Dada, Ethan said suddenly, clearly, his dark eyes fixed on Daniel's face. Daniel's breath caught. Maya, come here. She appeared in the doorway, Sophie on her hip. What's wrong? Say it again, buddy, Daniel urged. Come on. Dada, Ethan repeated, grinning. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. Sophie, not to be outdone, shouted Mama from Maya's arms. They stood frozen, these 2 adults who'd created 2 small humans, who'd found their way back to each other through the most unlikely path, and Daniel felt his eyes burn with tears. I almost missed this, he said hoarsely. I almost chose the empire over them. Over this. Maya sat beside him on the floor, Sophie immediately crawling over to join Ethan in investigating their father's face. But you didn't. You chose differently. That's what matters. I love you, Daniel said. Not a question, not a plea, just a truth he needed to speak. I know we're just co-parenting, and I'm not asking for anything, but I need you to know. I love you for the mother you are to our children, for the strength you showed raising them alone, for giving me the chance to become worthy of them. Maya's eyes filled with tears again. She cried easily these days, she told him, a leftover from pregnancy hormones. Ask me again in 6 months, she said softly. When you've survived their first birthday party and teething and learning to walk. When you've proven that this is forever, not just until it gets boring. Then we'll talk about what we are. I can wait, Daniel said. I'll wait as long as you need. He pulled both babies onto his lap, and Maya leaned against his shoulder. Through the window, the city stretched out below them. The same city where Daniel had once built an empire, where he'd chosen ambition over love, where he'd walked away from the best thing that had ever happened to him. That man was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that real power wasn't control. It was surrender. Surrendering to love that demanded everything. To tiny humans who needed you at your worst and loved you anyway. To a woman who'd seen him fail and gave him a second chance to get it right. They're going to need dinner soon, Maya said softly. 5 more minutes, Daniel replied, tightening his arms around his family. Because this messy, imperfect, absolutely ordinary moment was everything he'd been searching for without knowing it. The life he'd run from had become the life that saved him, and he was never running again. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.